Pretty well centered. Great. Nice little camera there. All right. Good enough. Lower that a little. All right, not as bad. Cool. All right. So possibly last week and this week are the two most contentious topics that we have to cover, at least amongst the various online communities. I think because there's a lot of writings out there as the church has undergone pressures from many different outside sources through its long history. And unfortunately, people often read these things out of context and try to apply things in ways that don't necessarily make sense anymore. So that's part of why I think it's a very important topic to talk about explicitly, is how we interact with other religions and specifically other Christian denominations. Some people even scoff at using the word denomination. They will try and claim that we shouldn't even call them that. I'm not sure that for the purposes of the conversation that that's a important argument to have. I do also want to be very clear that you probably noticed through all of this that I haven't done a lot of kind of direct comparison of this group believes this thing and we believe that or whatever. And that's not going to change today. The biggest reason being, well, twofold. One, I wasn't any of those things, so I can't really speak I don't feel like I can confidently put words in other people's mouth about what they believe or don't believe. Not to mention the fact that just because you call yourself Lutheran or Episcopal or Seventh-day Adventist or whatever means that you actually know the things that that church teaches and believe them all. But also, I just don't think it's necessary or important. You're not coming here to learn about them. If you're coming from one of them, you already know about them. If not, who cares? You're here to learn about what we are. So in this discussion today about how we view other Christian groups, we're not going to talk about how they view us because we don't really care. I don't think it's really important. The Protestant world is so vast that some groups are very accepting of nearly anything that vaguely whiffs of Christianity, and to those groups I'm sure we'd be great. Other groups are so vehemently anti-Catholic that we look way too similar, and they don't really care about the specifics. It's just going to be a non-starter, and everything in between. So we're not gonna approach it from that angle. Again, I just really don't think it's that helpful. So what we are going to do is we're going to talk about our views of these things. So before we talk about everyone else, I think it's very important to start with ourselves a little bit and just define where we are. So we believe that this is the church that Jesus Christ started. More specifically, as you may have seen through the course of this class, the continuation of the Jewish church, that the Old Testament fully transitions, passes away, and is replaced with this by God himself. And therefore, we are the continuation of Israel. But we're very hesitant to say where the church is not. We sing in our hymns that God is everywhere present and filling all things. So it would be very bold to try and claim that he can't work through whatever else is out there. I think it's definitely a minority opinion, although you may run into it, those that think that any remotely religious experience one might have outside the Orthodox Church is purely demonic. That is not really the mainstream Orthodox approach to that. If God is everywhere present and filling all things, and if he can do whatever he pleases, then he absolutely can use whatever good there is to be had in other religions to bring people to himself. So we know this is the church, established by Christ, continued through his disciples and apostles, maintained continuously through this day without break by the laying on of hands of our bishops. There has not been a time when the church, passed away or when the church was not. This is that church. I've got a little quote from Mark here. Now John answered him, saying, Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in thy name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. But Jesus said, Do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterward speak evil of me, for he who is not against us is on our side. So we know this is the church that Jesus Christ started, continued by his apostles and disciples, continuously through today, but God left the door open for work everywhere. I've already quoted, right, in one of our procurement on God, our God does whatsoever he pleases. Or who so great a God is our God? Thou art the God that works, that doeth wonders, or works wonders. He's certainly, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, capable of working through anyone that he desires at any time and saving whomever he pleases. So to try and claim that this is the only place would be contrary to what God himself has said. Now, why then have anything if God can do this whenever? Well, he gave this to us. He said, when you pray, do it like this. He established a method and a mode. We know that this is good. We know that this is effective for rooting out the passions inside of us and becoming like Christ, to put on Christ, as we say in some of our hymns. We know this works. Other things might. God can choose, if he wants, to work through anything, of course. But we know that God is present in his church and in the sacraments here. We know that this is effective here, if we allow it to be anyway. And you'll even find some stories of saints that will, walk by a Catholic church and make the sign of the cross as if they're going in front of an Orthodox church or something. It's not common, but there are certainly those saints that somewhat famously did that. So we absolutely have an understanding of this is the church. Out there, it's probably not all bad. Another important side of this is when we talk about salvation. I just said we know that God is present here. We know that the sacraments are effective and that if we allow him to, God can and will work through the church and us. We also see several Orthodox writers describing that heaven will be not just Orthodox Christians, but all those who come to some knowledge of God. That knowledge might not be the knowledge we receive here. The church understands that written in the heart of all men is what's called sometimes the natural law. You'll find across pretty much all cultures around the world, there are some things that are almost universal. Killing is almost always considered bad. Separate from war, separate from capital punishment. Generally speaking, almost every culture around the world considers basically murder in cold blood to be bad. Nearly every culture around the world considers stealing from your neighbor to be bad. These are not things that have been written and passed down amongst all these people. I mean, we're talking about highly separated and very isolated peoples that have these more or less universal rules within their cultures, despite being utterly unrelated to each other, utterly disconnected. We call that the natural law, and we are judged by what we know. So if all we know is the natural law, then that's what we'll be judged by. If we have come to know the church, accepted baptism, and are receiving the sacraments, well, now we're held to a much higher standard. But we're also given many more tools, right? Because we know, as I said before, that God is present here, that he is active in the sacraments. We have what we need if we allow it to work anyway. So, God says in Ezekiel, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked man turn from his way and live. Or St. Luke writes also, I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. So, yes, of course, this is the church that Jesus Christ established, founding, continuing the Jewish faith, giving us the new law, giving us the gift of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, establishing the church through the apostles and disciples through to this day. Yes, not arguing that. I'm not trying to claim anything other than that. But it would also be incorrect to say that God can't do things outside these four walls. That said, we do not practice open communion. There's many reasons for this. The most basic being, if you look through the stories of communion as it's given in some of the earliest days of the church, we see people dying that receive it unworthily. And we say every time the chalice comes out that it be for the remission of sins and unto life everlasting. As we say in some of our post-communion prayers, let me not be burnt by communicating. We understand that communion is a good thing, but that it can also be dangerous if we're not truly, actually ready for it. And therefore, that it is much safer to only commune those that we know. And to be very clear here, that means that if someone comes in who is Orthodox but I've never met, I ask them at the chalice, I interrogate them. Are you an Orthodox Christian? What church do you go to? Are you in good standing? I won't commune them until I feel at least confident enough that, other than outright lying to me, this person is Orthodox. Better yet is to contact me in advance so I know to expect them, and maybe even CC your priest, so I know you truly are in good standing. And amongst the parishioners here, people may, fail to do their pre-communion prayers because of any number of reasons, or maybe having a particularly hard time in a marriage, or struggling with a sibling or something that they've got a really bitter rivalry with, or something like that. And they may elect, or I may tell them not to receive communion as part of confession until they are prepared, until they can actually prepare. So it isn't even fair to say that communion is for all Orthodox Christians. It is for baptized, practicing Orthodox Christians who are in good standing, at peace with everyone, and have done all the preparation they need. And ideally, that should be pretty much everyone. But in practice, often, it's not uncommon for there to be people that don't. So if we're not even going to commune every Orthodox person, how could we ever conceive of communing people that aren't, that have no understanding of all of the preparation that goes into it for us? And we go the opposite direction as well. If anyone here were to commune elsewhere, well, then you are excommunicating yourself from here. You are communing there and are excommuned from here. So if you are at the point of a catechumen, or let alone fully received in the church, that should be the point in time when we stop participating in the sacraments of other churches, other denominations. Because we're focusing on being here, we're focusing on learning what's going on here, and that doesn't mean you won't end up in some other church sometimes, especially because we live in a country where most people are not Orthodox, and so your family likely isn't, and may very well feel very strongly that you need to go to some particular thing or whatever. Okay, fine. But you don't have to partake of the sacraments there. But as I put here, you should. It is okay, and not only is it okay, but you should show basic respect. I think sometimes this is what we pick up online, is this kind of elitism of, well, we know that we're the church. And it can become almost a source of pride. That's bad. Of course, all the things I've said previously about knowing that this is the church still hold. But we can't go around judging other people who are just at a different point in their life, that are at a different point on their journey to Christ than we are. And so, yeah, of course, don't actively participate in their services, but you can show up. Don't heckle them, just like we wouldn't want anyone to come here and do that to us. Be a good neighbor. I will say sometimes you will hear particularly angry individuals online yelling about not praying with heretics. Really, what that is actually getting at is liturgically. But our services are open to the public. We have non-Orthodox people that come to our services all the time, and we do prayers with them. They may very well join along with the Lord's Prayer or the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed that's at least fairly well known. Are we all going to be quiet because they're saying the prayer right now, and we have to wait until they're done so we can say it? No, of course not. We say it together. If they say it with us, they say it with us. So if some random person on the street walks up to you and asks to pray with them, say the Lord's Prayer with them. If your family wants to bless the food on Thanksgiving, although it's a little late for this particular week here, but, say the Lord's Prayer. Nearly everyone who is at least marginally Christian has probably at least familiar enough with the Lord's Prayer. So say it with them. Great. If you are asked to do things that are not our prayers, that isn't even to say necessarily that you can't say them. Just maybe be a little more in tune with what it is that's being said. And if there's theologically questionable things, maybe don't participate in that. And if you're unsure, well, just say sorry and I don't know that one, or whatever it may be. But again, to imply that we can't say prayers with heretics is to grossly misunderstand what that's talking about. I cannot invite a Lutheran pastor to serve at the altar with me. That would be wrong. That would be praying with heretics. I can't invite an Anglican pastor or a Seventh-day Adventist or a Mormon or any other Christian group to come serve with me in the altar. But if they come here and stand through our service with everyone else and cross themselves because that's what they see other people doing, or say the Lord's Prayer because they know it, great. We're not going to, suddenly all shut up just so that we're not praying with heretics. I've already said this, but attending services is fine, even, weddings, funerals, baptisms, of course. If a friend or family member in whatever denomination wants you to be a part of it, show up. Be respectful. If someone asks you to be a sponsor or godparent, that's a different story. Opinions vary on this by denomination, but generally speaking, I would say something along the lines of, well, our understanding of a godparent is that it's to raise this person in the faith. I have a different faith than you, so that doesn't seem like a good match. Sorry, maybe you should find someone who has the same faith as you, who you want to help raise your child with that faith. Certainly be present. Great. Bear that joy of Christ with love, be an example worth following wherever you are, yeah. Just, no reason to be actively participating in some other service. I really hope I don't have to say this, but just, this is going online, and to be very abundantly clear, I hope no one interprets this as me saying that all denominations are valid, or that we should treat them as being, basically the same thing or anything like that. But the reality is, the United States is not an Orthodox country. In fact, it's becoming more and more so, barely even a Christian country. So if we try and hold ourselves to the standards that you might be able to get away with in countries that, like Georgia or Greece, that are majority Orthodox, well, sure, you could be a lot more strict in those countries because you just can get away with it. Here, people have no idea what we are. They have no idea. You say Orthodox and they think Jew or something like that. Worst case, if you're being too standoffish and weird, some people might even start thinking that we're some weird cult or something, right? And this is not helpful for anyone. You don't want to be the reason why someone associates the Orthodox Church with bad and something they never want to be a part of or never want to be interested in, just because you felt like you couldn't say the Lord's Prayer with them on Thanksgiving or something crazy like that. So in general, at least once you're becoming a catechumen, you should be attending here primarily, or an Orthodox church primarily. Not to say you won't ever step foot in another church, but you should primarily be here. And again, we're not ecumenists, so I'm not saying this, and we don't want just unity for the sake of unity. Would it be wonderful if the Lord could put things back together again? Of course. But there are major problems that need to be solved before that point. But as I put here, we don't have to be rude or mean. It is perfectly acceptable for someone to say that they're Christian and for you to go, okay. It's perfectly acceptable for them to invite you to, their wedding and for you to say, great, I'd love to be there. If someone tries to hand you a little flat wafer, don't take it. If someone invites you to, again, be a sponsor or whatever, no thank you. But don't be rude to me. Just be normal. Be polite. Be present. That's fine. Another big part of all of this is that, so these Christian groups, they all have different understandings of salvation, of life in the church, our relationship with God. So, I mean, even just what a basic Christian life looks like. So, again, just to be overabundant of clarity here, there are just many, many, many reasons why we can't unite. Being polite to another Christian group is very different from welcoming them or calling them the same as us or allowing them to serve with me in the altar or whatever. We believe fundamentally different things about who Christ is and our relationship to him and what the work of the church and of the Christian body should be. I suspect that's probably clear by now, but if not, you've got the handouts from the previous week. So go look through those or ask questions after or message me or whatever. But the reality is the Orthodox Church is not really similar to other Christian groups these days. Even some of the closest, sometimes people will say, well, the Catholic Church is probably the closest because they look at some of the pomp and circumstance and they feel like that's similar. Well, yeah, sort of. In some ways, sure, we certainly have a more liturgical rite like the Catholic Church does, but we still ultimately believe different things about salvation. We don't believe in purgatory, for example, and there's plenty of other things. Differences, opinions about the Pope and whatnot. Or you might look at some particular kind of revivalist movement and go, emulating the church of the early Christians and the life of those that were coming immediately after Christ. And, in some ways, sure, we might have similarities there, but then you look at everything else, it's all wildly different. So, of course, there's going to be little points here and there where the Orthodox Church is similar, but nothing else really comes that close at all. And so, again, we are polite, we are nice, we do the kind of minimum engagement we can to not be dismissive or rude, but we understand that we are very different and that's just the way it's going to be. I call out here specifically the mode of salvation is a common point of contention. Our form, recapitulation, or sometimes also called Christus Victor, puts Christ as the center of our path to salvation, him trampling down death by death. So, things like penal substitutionary atonement is just not something you're going to find here. It's just a very different way of approaching the cross and what Christ's work on it was to be, and therefore what our relationship to him is. Of course, we know through him we can put on Christ, we can live a holy life. Another thing is certain groups consider, like the angry God kind of understanding you get in some groups as well. We certainly have no understanding of that. You read through the scriptures and it always calls God merciful and compassionate and loving and whatnot. So we know that it is an absolute requirement for those in the church to remain in the church. But for those outside the church, they have the natural law. We know a good, well-trodden path. We know from the lives of the myriad of saints that adorn our walls that this is a good, an effective way of living one's life. We know that a lot of good can come both within ourselves and without. And we leave the rest outside the church up to God. Even in the way we approach evangelism, right, things are just very different. In general, we plant a seed and God provides the increase. We can't really deal with the rest of what's out there. So we know that this is good. Those of us that are here, great. It's a high standard. We hold ourselves to it. We know we've got the tools to make it through. If we work at it and allow him to take us through. But ultimately, our approach is to acquire inner peace so that thousands around us will be saved. A quote from St. Seraphim the Seraph. Our life then, again, in contrast to some of the other Christian groups out there, it's something I preach about it somewhat regularly, is not to bash people upside the head with the gospel or the scripture. It's not to, try and with eloquent arguments convince people that they're wrong. Most of the time, these things just don't work, and we don't take those approaches. We understand that the best way to bring people to the church, the best way to ultimately convert the nations, as Jesus commands, is to be the light of Christ, is to be the love and compassion that he wants us to be if we allow him to work through us. And that means not being rude, not being dumb, just being polite and inviting people. That's, I think, one of the things that we often forget is, especially people that are just starting the journey, there's often a great zeal as you're kind of learning more and more, and it's interesting and exciting. Invite other people along. You don't need to convince people with arguments. It's a common pitfall to try and debate people about this kind of thing, but ultimately it's really effective. Just invite them to come see. Do a trade. I'll come to your service if you come to mine, right? That ultimately is far more effective than most other forms of evangelization. Just getting people in the door, letting them experience what worship looks like, and the rest is up to God. So that's the majority of what I have for week 10. I'm going a little quick because I do want to cover a little bit of what originally was the 11th week. But just to point out here, if you are more interested in comparative religion, which again, as I started out by saying at the beginning, I really don't like doing personally. I don't think it is the most effective form of teaching this kind of class. But if you are interested in that kind of thing, as some are, or if you are coming from a particular background and want to know more about the differences between that and Orthodoxy, the priest Andrew Stephen Damick has I believe it's multiple books called Orthodoxy and Heterodoxy that goes through in pretty reasonable detail most, at least, of the Christian denominations that you'll find today. I don't think it'll have what some random individual pastor decided to split off and do on his own, but most of the more mainstream groups he's got covered pretty well. And he goes into, again, pretty reasonable detail. So if that is something you're interested in, I recommend that. It's, again, a good example of kind of showing some of the differences in a little more direct comparison. And at least from what I've been told, he's pretty good, pretty accurate. So that's that. Then the other thing that I wanted to cover from the other handout then is what's next. So as I hope this is known and not a surprise, but joining the Orthodox Church should be a lifelong commitment, just like a marriage might be, should ideally be. And so just like a marriage, I would not expect that most people would walk into the church and immediately be baptized or in some way received it in the church. It takes time to learn. It takes time to change your life. The expectation of an Orthodox Christian is not just attending services like you find in many Christian groups these days. We have an expectation of a prayer rule within your own life and a fasting rule and all these kinds of things that will take time to develop, time to become comfortable with. And sure, probably much, much longer time than you will practically have as an inquirer or catechumen. But I find myself telling this to people all the time. The church is not going anywhere. In ancient times, the catechumenate was 3 years long. Again, that was determined to be a good period of time for you to really get to know the church. You'd see several liturgical cycles. You'd have plenty of time for instruction, for changing your life, such that by the time you were brought into the church, you had a very solid foundation to stand on. In modern times, we don't tend to do that 3-year process. It can vary wildly. There are those people for whom it takes many years. There are those for whom it is only a few months. It really depends on the person and where they're coming from. Generally speaking, my personal preference is to encourage people to just slow down a little bit, take a little bit more time. As I said before, the church is not going anywhere, so we'll be here. We are not going anywhere anytime soon. We've been doing this for 2,000 some odd years, so we're not going to stop in another few. Just take your time, get comfortable with things, ask all of the questions you have, get to know the community here. I often recommend people that are seeking to become catechumens to find a sponsor, a godparent, someone that you trust, that you can get to know very well in this community, who you can also ask questions of. I understand, I try to be as open as I can, but not everyone's going to get along with me perfectly, and there's also only one of me, so it's very helpful to have other people that you can connect with and that you feel comfortable talking to. And I generally try and recommend, although again, it depends a lot on the person, to take about a year so you at least see one full liturgical cycle, so that there's no surprise as we get to some feast you haven't seen before. Again, it's not a hard and fast rule. Everyone is going to be in a different place, is going to take more or less time depending on their background and however long they've spent learning about the Orthodox Church before stepping in it for the first time, let alone taking this class. But generally speaking, I offer this class for inquirers. It's, as I think we all know, it's open to the public. And we cover a lot of things. Not a lot like super in depth, but I try and cover as much as I possibly can. And I recommend during this time that if you are interested in taking the next steps, start thinking about who your patron saint might be and find a sponsor or godparent, and then of course talk to me once you're very certain that this is what you want to do, and we can schedule the time to say the prayers to make you catechumen. After you become a formal catechumen, it's expected that you begin a prayer and a fasting rule. It will be simple, so don't be too stressed if you've seen the big long list of all of the things, right? That is certainly the end goal, but that might be 50 years from now. So it is a process. It will take time, and that's okay. We will start small and build up from there. Not alone, though. Talk to me about those things. It's expected that you start becoming familiar with the life of the church. You should be attending services here more than you are elsewhere. This should be your primary place of worship. And you should be trying to participate in as many of the other activities of the church as possible. And like I say, just whomever you've selected to be your godparents from when you came in, have a dinner with them or something. Go out to lunch or get a coffee or something. Get to know them better. And then as you start preparing for the next step, if you haven't gotten a patron saint yet, start thinking about that. You can talk to me if you're not sure. There's a wide variety. The general recommendation these days is if you have a name that is perfectly acceptable as a Christian name, just use that. Don't take a weird name. Don't be Paphnutius or Mamas or I don't know, so many interesting Greek names out there. Don't do that. For one, it's weird, and the expectation is that that's your name once you're received into the church. So people are going to call you that, Barsanuphius, and that's just going to be weird for everyone. Also, you're not used to that name. That's not your name. So can you? Sure. If you develop a very strong connection to Saint whatever, fine, right? But I will try and gently push you towards especially names that you may already have. In America, we almost always have a first name and a middle name, so you can look at those two. If you really aren't connecting with anyone that you share a name with or whatever, you could check your birthday, see who was commemorated on that day. My younger son was born on the feast of St. Cyril, and his name is Cyril. So, although that was not strictly planned, that is almost just sort of how it worked out, but glory to God. And then, of course, you'll have to talk to me, and we'll schedule the actual baptism. You have to do a full life confession at some point in time beforehand. Talk about that when we get there. That's a little farther off. If you've got questions, talk about that in a minute. But, and of course, you really actually have to have your patron and your godparents or sponsors figured out by that point in time, or else we can't actually do the reception, which is the last step. Depending on your background, which is different for everyone, the way that you're received can be different. The very, very high level is if you have a valid baptism that is triple immersion in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, we will probably consider that to be valid. In modern times, it's often very difficult to know because of the change that that many of the Protestant denominations have undergone as to what exactly was done for someone, unless it was like really a long time ago. And in the case of there being a question, or in the case of knowing that it was either an improper form, for example, a single immersion in the name of Jesus Christ, or something that didn't involve water. I've heard of some groups doing like flower baptisms or something like that. We would not consider that valid. Then we'd have to do a full baptism. But if we are going to accept your baptism, which in modern times, generally speaking, it's often mostly just Catholic people whose baptisms are accepted, but not always. Then you could be received by chrismation if we are going to accept that baptism. This is another big can of worms that people can get all worked up about online, but the reality is if you look at the canons of the early church, all manner of people were received by forms other than baptism. Arians had their baptisms accepted. If an Arian, the arch heresy, was received by something other than baptism, it sure does seem like we could probably receive at least some people today that are Orthodox by chrismation. Not to say there aren't some pretty suspect theological opinions out there that may very well rival Arianism, but that said, certainly there seems to be room within the Christian world today to receive some people by baptism, of course, and also some by chrismation. And I do want to highlight that just because you've been received does not mean that the process is done. As I'm sure you'll realize as you come to start doing a prayer rule and a fasting rule on your own, there's a long road ahead of what you could be doing and aren't yet. And it will take probably many years to get to be feeling both very confident in your rule and to have your rule be somewhat substantial. It shouldn't be something that causes you to burn out, but it should be something that continually challenges you. Because the reality is there's almost always more you could do. And so we expect that for the rest of our lives we will struggle, that we will try to do a little better and a little better and a little better against our passions, trying to perfect our prayer and fasting rules, and to work to live the gospel message. So we can't become stagnant just because you've been received. It does not mean you're done. It doesn't mean you'll be done soon. Probably doesn't mean you'll be done ever. If we become complacent, then we give room for the evil and for the devil to come in and pull us off the path towards the kingdom and towards all sorts of other bad places. So we know that we need to continue the work that we put in as catechumens the rest of our life. The reality is we don't ever really stop being catechumens. The word catechumen means one who is learning. There's always more to learn. There's always something else that you can pick up that you didn't know, either about the way our liturgics work, about some theological writing of some saint, about our mode of salvation. There's all sorts of different things out there. You will never, ever be done learning. I can almost guarantee that. So, whatever your next steps may be, really the big thing is just don't feel bad, don't rush, don't feel like you have to do it all now. The church is not going anywhere. We'll be here. You've got the rest of your life. So take your time, do what you need to do, get your ducks in order, get to a point where you're confident in taking the step, and that doesn't necessarily mean that literally everything internally needs to be figured out and worked out. Of course, the goal isn't to finish everything and then be received, because that's also never going to happen. But at least, start to kind of get things in order and feel like you're in a good place, have some, fairly grounded experience in an actual church and not just things you've read or seen online or whatever, in the community here. And then we'll talk. We'll go from there. So that's all I have. I have some other, my own things to prompt if there are specific questions you have. Feel free to ask those or pull from my list, or it could just be done early too if you really want, but turn it over to you.
Just real quick, because a Protestant thing is that we say, oh, you never know where you're going to go. What if you die tomorrow? You got to make sure you got up today. So let's say, like, just hypothetically, like someone was on a journey to become in the church and they just passed, like, God's mercy, obviously.
Sure. I mean, that. But, yeah, so this is something that I've had to talk to a few people about, but the reality is, at least once you become a catechumen, the church's approach is to give you an Orthodox funeral. We basically treat you as if you were Orthodox. You expressed that interest. You were on that path. You were clearly going to do that. Just like, if someone who's enfianced died, I don't know that most people would treat the fiancé as anything other than the spouse of the newly departed. Technically, were they married? I mean, I guess not, but clearly that's where they were going. Clearly that's the relationship they had. So, yeah, I mean, I just spent a bunch of time, remember at the beginning, talking about how we know that the church is here, we don't know where it is not necessarily, and that we are all given a rule, the natural law that we follow, written on our hearts. And ultimately, that's what we will be judged by if we're not here. So, all that to say, yeah, God is merciful, compassionate. He loves mankind. He desires not the death of a sinner, but that he should turn from his way and live. So, if you are making, progress towards the church and just didn't quite make it, it would be kind of silly to not honor that, to not recognize that that's where you were going, that that's what you were doing. So, yeah, that's our general approach.
And would someone have to do the formal prayers to become a catechumen, to take the catechumen class? Or can you just take that 201 class?
So, I mean, I usually recommend that you become a catechumen and then take the class.
Okay, gotcha.
But I'm not going to kick anyone out. It's very practical. So, I mean, there are some things that may just be interesting. But my own opinion is that if you're not sure, it's a lot of information that may or may not be interesting or useful ever again. So, by all means, if you want to show up for it. I won't stop you. But I think it will tend to be more applicable and therefore probably a little more interesting to those that have at least taken that next step. But I won't stop you.
Okay, and that's also like a 12-week type of thing?
Yeah, 10 week.
10-week, gotcha.
Sort of like a semester.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't do a finals week though.
Okay, like there's no test. Okay.
There's no dead week. There's no finals week. Yeah, you're fine.
And the last thing I want to say is that you know what scrupulosity is?
Being overly scrupulous. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. What I like about liturgical prayers is it's prayers that has been like set in time. That
Yeah.
Orthodox people pray, but I don't know. Do you ever feel like like maybe you don't pray for someone? I have this list of family members and people, and just feel. At this point, it's kind of like you said earlier, like burnout. At this point, it's like kind of like guilt, where if I don't pray for these people, I feel kind of, I don't know, like bad,
Mm.
And I was told by another Orthodox Christian that he's not on Facebook, but he was like, you should talk to your spiritual father about this.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So being overly scrupulous is a problem. That's another reason that I generally kind of suggest taking some more time. So, whatever that initial period of very strong zeal has an opportunity to cool and temper a little bit. without there being the added layer of, well, now I'm baptized, now I'm, receiving communion and everything. Christ says his burden is light. So how do we balance that out with all of the rules? The reality is the rules don't save us. We don't ever claim they do. They're tools. They're very helpful tools. We know from my own experience and from the experience of all the saints around us that they are extremely effective tools if we make good use of them. But ultimately, they're just tools, which is why, for example, a pregnant woman or one who is nursing is not expected to be fasting at all. It's just not helpful in that moment. They have other things they need to be focusing on. It is not important for them to be, hyperfixating on, continuing all of the fasting they were doing before. It's just not important. It's a good tool, absolutely. And it's one that they should pick up again once they're, a little more back to normal, when things have settled a little bit and their world has had a chance to readjust and things have normalized a little bit. Great, of course, absolutely. But it's a tool. It's okay to just not use it when it's not appropriate. And that's really our approach to a lot of these things, right? They're good, they're helpful, they're useful, absolutely. But ultimately, they're just tools. So, praying for others is a very good and important thing. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have to do it every single day? No. There's going to be times in your life where that's just not possible. Things may be relatively calm right now, but who knows in a few years. I can tell you from my own experience, getting married and having kids, that suddenly the things you have time for, you do not. And all sorts of my prayer rule before I had littles was much more substantive, much longer than what I'm able to do now. I still do stuff. There was certainly a period of time, especially immediately after both kids were born, where I really couldn't do much. It was a struggle just to be alive, be a human being for a little while there until, we kind of got back into the rhythm of things with the new infant. And things have stabilized now a bit, and I'm, able to go back into a more reasonable cycle of prayers. But absolutely for a little bit there, I just had to set it aside and focus on being present for my family as their dad and husband. Of course, pray for your friends and family. Pray for those that have asked you to do so, but don't feel like you absolutely have to do it every single day. That's just not the way that works. And, do it when you can. Do it twice a week or whatever. Just find something that works for you. But again, the really important thing here is it better to take a break or to burn out and never come back? I would argue, I think the church pretty readily agrees with me, that it's better to back off a little bit and remain strong in your faith and continue with the good things you can do than to continue with absolutely maxing everything you could possibly do and then burning out and never wanting to step foot in a church again ever. It's not helpful for you or anyone else. So be reasonable with yourself and honest with yourself about what you can actually do, and don't go beyond that. Push a little bit, right? It's always good to push yourself a little bit, but don't push yourself to the point of burning out and just leaving the whole thing behind, because that's way worse. It's much better to take it slow, ease into things as you're able, slowly add more and more things as time goes on, than it is to jump into the deep end and then immediately get back out again and never come back. So, yeah, take your time. Yeah. If you are, and you kind of briefly touched on the set prayers. Pretty much every prayer book, sometimes I think they usually put it in the morning, but sometimes they'll put it in the evening prayers. Will include a section of spots where you can add names for people. So if you are struggling for how to pray for these people, you could also just do the prayers that give you spots to put people's names in, and then you're not trying to come up with things for all of these people. You listen to the way that we pray for people in our services here, right, with the augmented litany, where we just do big old, you've been to liturgy a few times, I think.
To the library?
Yeah.
I haven't been to a single one.
Oh, well, have you listened online? I don't know.
No, I have not.
Wow, my goodness.
I listened to your homilies.
Okay. Well, at some point, you'll come to one of these, and you'll see the augmented litany, where we add just like a paragraph of names. It's the same text for the petition and the litany every time, but the people kind of cycle in and out as different people have different needs. So, if there's a really good friend that's really struggling with something special or particular, sure, say a special or dedicated prayer for them. But most of the time, we pray for people in bulk, praying that, because the reality is we can't really know everyone's needs. God knows their needs far better than we can. So the most effective prayer we can have is to just ask God to give them what they need when they need it, to withhold what needs to be withheld when it needs to be withheld, and turn the rest over to Him. So, but like I said, if you look through the Orthodox prayer books, I think usually morning, but sometimes evening as well, they'll have a section where there's prayers for all sorts of different people and spots for names for living and departed. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah.
My condolences again for
Thank you.
the loss. That's tough.
Yeah. Well, anything else? This is the last session, so last chance to ask questions.
I know, right? I'm trying to, yeah, no.
I even give you some prompts here.
Influential writers, saints, American saints, schisms, Moscow versus.
Yeah.
What's EP?
Ecumenical Patriarch. Constantinople, at least the name, I'm sure. The head bishop of that area is sometimes called the Ecumenical Patriarch. There's some debate back and forth between the Patriarch of Moscow and the Patriarch of the Ecumenical Patriarch about authority for who can do what particular thing. But generally speaking, instead of having a pope, we have more like a Speaker of the House. That person is the Ecumenical Patriarch. So, yeah.
Are all of your parishioners, should I say that, all the people of the church, they're all participating in this nativity fast? I'll say that unless they're pregnant or something like.
Right. So, in some sense, yes. Once you become a catechumen, the expectation is that you participate in the life of the church, and that includes fasting periods. How varies wildly. Certain people have orders from doctors to increase their protein, and so they're expected to be eating, a certain type of diet on the regular, and they may not really be able to fast the way we would normally do it. They'll talk to me, and we'll come up with a way to make that work. Are they fasting? Yes. Are they fasting the same way as anyone else? No. Like you pointed out, pregnant nursing type of women probably are still doing something. It's not uncommon to maybe try and cut out sugar or, I don't know, something like that, just to at least do something, but absolutely not fasting in the same way as everyone else. And in some cases, and I would never push this, just not at all. Again, for pregnant and fasting, or people that are preparing for a procedure, or people that have, I don't know, we fast before communion, but some people have medication that they have to take every morning and they have to take it with food. Okay, take the smallest amount you can so that you're not, puking all over the place or whatever. So we work with people where they are. And yes, with probably rare exception, everyone here is in some way fasting right now. But it will vary wildly from person to person. Another good example is although I don't know that off the top of my head, I don't know if there's anyone here that would fit that bill, but extremely active athletes with very high calorie needs will often have some form of a modified fasting rule as well, because it's just hard to get the number of calories you need if you're doing a very strict fast the way we normally would. We work with the people and their particular needs, and so again, yes, but not in the same way.
Do you think that there's any benefit to me picking up any type of prayer rule right now? I know before you gave, that was like months ago, you gave me the Trisagian prayers, and there was also Psalm 50, but I asked for that, and I felt like I shouldn't ask for that, and also the Nicene Creed, and I asked for that, and I felt like I shouldn't ask for that, and now I just feel like I'm in a period of my life where I'm just working a lot of hours. It's the first time in my life where I'm putting these out I feel like, God is so good to me. He's been so good to me. I should dedicate this time. But it does feel like I'm just doing it to do it at sometimes, where I'm just like,
Sure. So that will happen. To expect that you will have an ardent and burning love for God your whole life, that would be lovely. I'm going to be real honest. Probably not going to happen. We have cycles in our life. Times that things are good and our faith tends to be a lot stronger. Things are bad, maybe our faith is a little less strong. That's okay. I mean, I'm not going to say it's good, but it is pretty normal, and the reality is that it will not always feel amazing. Sometimes we are doing it just to do it. Don't burn out, so probably back off in those times. I find myself telling parishioners sometimes, if you are at a point where you feel like you can't do anything anymore, you've pushed yourself too far. It's better to do something very small, but continue doing that consistently, than it is to stop and do nothing because you burned out. So drop down to something minimal and do that consistently. If it's 5 minutes of saying the Jesus prayer, okay. Take 5 minutes out of your day to say the Jesus prayer and then go on and do whatever else. But do that consistently. If you're going to, shorten it, just make sure it's consistent. And usually that also helps kind of shake things up a little bit, and doing things a little differently can kind of help reorient a little bit and whatnot. So if it's too much, it's too much. We'll talk and figure out what works for you. Because again, it is better to be faithful in the little things than to abandon the grand things you're reaching for because you just couldn't get there and burned out. So, yeah, if it's too much, talk to me. We'll figure it out. Yeah. And that's true through your whole life. There's a temptation sometimes as people, especially someone who's been doing the same prayer rule for 15 years, and then, something happens in their life and suddenly things are much more difficult for them. They have some kind of health crisis or health crisis in their extended family or something like that. And there can be this temptation to be like, well, if I can't do the whole thing, then why even bother doing any of it? Don't do that. Do something, even if minimal, do something consistently. It does not have to be the same thing you've done for the last 10 years or 15 years. It just needs to be something. Something is better than nothing. So, say the Jesus prayer for a few minutes and do a few prostrations or something like that, and then move on. And, that's okay. Again, better that than nothing. So, yeah.
Real quick, why did you guys do those prostrations during Vespers? Is it because of the nativity fast? I did one because I just saw you guys doing it, but I was just like, oh.
Yeah, it's so in the full Lenten practice, as we do during Lent, we add a lot of prostrations to our services. It is not very common, but it isn't wrong, to do basically a lesser form of the Lenten service during some of the other fasts, like the Apostles' Fast and the Nativity Fast. It's pretty uncommon. I like doing them because I think most people these days just aren't in the practice of doing prostrations really, and it is very much a part of the life of the church to be doing prostrations regularly. And so I like taking the opportunity. It's not a big departure from the normal. I mean, it's just a little bit we kind of tack on at the end of the normal Vespers. So I like doing that. It's a few prostrations, so gets you a little bit of a leg workout, but not too bad.
Yeah.
But it's not very common. You probably wouldn't. No, it's not common to do Vespers through the week at a lot of parishes. But even if they do, they probably wouldn't do that form. But you never know. Since we're not a monastery doing services every day, but we are doing a few, I like to do what we can. So, yeah. But again, if you look at it as that is a form of service specific for the lesser fasting periods, like Apostles' Fast and Nativity Fast.
Okay.
Yeah. Or Advent, as it's sometimes called.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I got. Those are the personal questions, but I thank you for taking the time.
Sure, of course. Well, all right. Like I said, that's the last week, so we are done. We'll take a break through nativity here in December, and some of the feasts we have back to back going into the new year, and start again next year. So,
Again, right? The Great Lent is like around March, April?
yeah. Yeah, because as I'm sure you know, Easter, or as we call it, Pascha, changes its exact time. So when we begin Lent, then also shifts to match when the beginning, or to match when Pascha is. But yeah, early spring.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, well, I told myself I'd want to finish the inquiry, because last time I missed a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.